My name is Claire Hargrove. I'm 34 years old. The night my husband sat across from me at our kitchen table, slid a color-coded spreadsheet of my weekly grocery receipts across the marble surface, and said with the careful calm of a man who has rehearsed his opening statement, "I think we need to talk about your spending habits." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push the spreadsheet back across the table the way every nerve in my body wanted to. I looked at the document. I looked at him. I said, "Okay." And then I looked back down at the paper and thought about the encrypted folder sitting on my personal laptop in the home office upstairs. The folder that contained 47 days of footage. The folder that contained 11 visits from a woman named Cassandra Webb. The folder that contained a phone call Ryan Hargrove made in our living room on a Tuesday evening while I was at work, in which he said in his own voice, captured by his own camera, into his own microphone, "She won't see it coming. She thinks I installed them to watch the housekeeper." What he didn't know was that 2 weeks after he installed 4 wireless surveillance cameras throughout our home without telling me, I found the admin password written on a sticky note tucked inside the inner zipper pocket of his gym bag while I was doing his laundry. He had set up a private monitoring application on his phone to watch every room. He thought he was watching me. He thought he had finally found the tool that would give him control over a narrative he had never fully owned. What he didn't know was that from the moment I typed that 12-character password into my personal laptop and heard the 4 camera feeds load simultaneously, I had been watching him. Every visit, every conversation, every closed door. This is that story. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this didn't start with cameras and it didn't start with a spreadsheet. It started the way all slow erosions start. With something that looked like love and revealed itself, over years, to be a very different thing entirely. Ryan Hargrove and I met at a corporate law firm holiday party in downtown Chicago 7 years ago. He was 30 years old, broad-shouldered, a third-year associate at Kellerman and Walsh, with the kind of cultivated confidence that fills a room before you've had a chance to decide whether you like the person filling it. I was 27, working as a senior financial analyst at Meridian Capital on Wacker Drive. I had my own apartment in Lincoln Park, my own retirement account, my own CFA designation, which I had earned at 26 after 2 years of examinations that I studied for alone at a kitchen table with a pot of coffee and no one to impress but myself. Our first date was at a restaurant on Michigan Avenue where the tasting menu cost $280 per person before wine. He insisted on paying, and I let him, because at the time I read it as generosity. It took me years to understand that Ryan Hargrove did not make gestures without keeping score. He collected favors the way other men collect receipts, carefully, with the long-term intention of presenting them at the most strategically effective moment. The dinner was the first entry in a ledger I didn't know existed. We dated for 2 years and married at a venue outside Lake Geneva when I was 29 and he was 32. 212 guests, white peonies, a live quartet, a dinner that cost $64,000. I paid for 40% of the wedding from my personal savings because Ryan explained that his bonus from the firm had been delayed by a billing cycle adjustment and the timing was unfortunate. He paid me back 4 months after we returned from the honeymoon, minus what he described as the coordination costs he had personally absorbed for the honeymoon planning. I accepted this without comment. I told myself that marriage required flexibility, that money would smooth out over time, that the accounting would balance eventually. I was a financial analyst. I should have known better than anyone that accounts which begin unbalanced rarely correct themselves without deliberate intervention. I want to tell you who I am with some precision because it matters to everything that follows. I am a chartered financial analyst. I have held my CFA designation since I was 26 years old. At the time Ryan installed those cameras in our home, I was earning $218,000 annually as a vice president of financial strategy at Meridian Capital. I managed a team of 11 analysts. I presented to the board of directors twice yearly and had been named to the firm's internal leadership committee for 3 consecutive years. I was not, by any objective measure, a woman with spending habits that required a color-coded intervention. I was also, And this is the part Ryan did not know, running a freelance financial consulting practice on the side that I had quietly built over 3 years. I had started it before our marriage, working evenings and weekends for small and mid-sized business owners who needed strategic financial guidance but couldn't afford full-time CFO services. By the time Ryan handed me that spreadsheet, the consulting practice was generating between $40,000 and $60,000 annually, depending on the quarter. Every dollar of it lived in a separate account at a bank Ryan had no connection to, managed by a CPA named Margaret Forsyth, who had known my full financial picture since before I said my vows. I did not hide the consulting income to deceive my husband. I kept it separate because it was mine, built from my own hours and my own expertise before he existed in my life, and because every instinct I had, financial, emotional, and professional, told me that a woman should always maintain something that belongs entirely to herself. The pattern of control in our marriage was sophisticated enough that I want to describe it carefully, because the people who experience this kind of thing often struggle to name it when it's happening. Ryan never screamed. He never threw objects. He was never physically threatening. He was something more technically precise than that. He monitored the joint account the way a senior partner monitors a junior associate's billable hours, with complete access, frequent review, and the authority to make any expenditure feel like a justification exercise. Not every purchase was questioned, just enough of them, just often enough to establish that the questioning was possible, that the scrutiny was always available, that my spending was always visible and potentially subject to comment. He deployed the information publicly and called it humor. At a dinner party with 4 other couples in March of the year before the cameras appeared, he said, with a laugh calibrated precisely to sound like warmth, "Claire spent $300 at a kitchen store last week. I told her we're not opening a restaurant." The table laughed. I smiled. Nobody asked why he knew the exact amount. Nobody asked why he said it to a room of people instead of to me privately. Nobody asked why a woman earning over $200,000 a year needed to have her kitchen knife purchase narrated at a dinner party as evidence of excess. He did this regularly. Not every week, not even every month, but with enough consistency that I understood the function of it. It was a broadcast. It was a signal to me and to anyone listening that my financial behavior was under his review and that he had the standing to comment on it publicly. Over time, he began referring to my salary as my spending money in casual conversation, with no particular emphasis, the way you'd refer to someone's allowance. Use your spending money for that. Your spending money should cover it. The implication was architectural. His income was the structure. Mine was the decoration. I want to tell you about the third specific moment that I think of now as a warning I received clearly and chose not to fully act on until I had more information. It was a Sunday morning in October, 14 months before the cameras appeared. We were having coffee at the kitchen island. I mentioned that a colleague of mine, a woman who also held a senior position at Meridian, was planning to negotiate a significant raise in her upcoming review. Ryan looked up from his phone and said, "Do you think that's smart? It makes her look aggressive." I said I thought she had strong grounds for it. He said, "Firms don't always promote the people who ask too loudly." Then he looked back at his phone. The conversation was over. He was not giving me advice about my colleague. He was giving me instructions about myself. I understood that. I just hadn't yet built everything I needed to act on the understanding. In year 3 of our marriage, I hired a housekeeper. Her name was Gloria Reyes. She was 51 years old, came every Tuesday and Thursday morning, and had raised 3 children largely alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood. She spoke minimal English and communicated everything important through the quality and care of her work. She had been with us for 3 years by the time the story reaches its turning point. And in that time, she had become one of the most reliable constants in my life in ways I could not have articulated, but felt with complete certainty. Ryan referred to Gloria as the cleaning lady, even after I had told him her name at minimum 40 separate times. He spoke to her in the loud, slowed-down cadence that people use when they confuse language for intelligence, and he watched her when she moved through the house, not with cruelty, but with the vigilant suspicion of a man who assumed everyone in his proximity was either a liability or a resource. It was Gloria who found the cameras. On a Thursday morning in late September of last year, she came to me in the kitchen while I was making my first cup of coffee, and she looked at the ceiling of the living room and then looked at me and raised her eyebrows. I set down the carafe and walked into the living room. In the upper corner near the crown molding, angled slightly downward, was a small black disc approximately the size and shape of a hockey puck, mate finish, nearly invisible. I walked through the rest of the house with my coffee cup in my hand, moving unhurriedly. The way I move through a client's financial records when I'm not yet sure what I'm looking for, but I'm certain something is there. I found one above the refrigerator in the kitchen, one in the upper corner of the living room, one mounted in the upstairs hallway outside the master bedroom positioned to capture the landing and the doors off it, and one in the shared home office, tucked behind a row of books on the built-in shelf, lens pointing toward the desk where I worked most evenings. 4 cameras. Installed in my home, without my knowledge, without a conversation, without a word. I stood in the office for a long time looking at the one behind the books. I could see the small red indicator light barely visible between the spines. Then I walked back downstairs, finished my coffee, kissed Gloria on the cheek, which made her laugh with surprise because I am not a particularly demonstrative person, and I went to work. Ryan came home at 7:42 that evening. I made dinner. We ate. I asked about his day, and he told me about a complex deposition. I told him about a board presentation I was preparing. We cleared the plates. We watched something on television, and I don't remember what it was, because I spent the entire time thinking about the cameras and what a man installs cameras in his own home for without telling his wife. We went to bed. He fell asleep. I lay in the dark counting the possibilities and ranking them by probability the way I rank investment risks. And by the time I fell asleep, I had already landed on the most likely explanation and begun building the response to it in my head. The password arrived 3 days later, not through any investigation on my part, but through an act of ordinary domestic life. I was moving Ryan's gym bag off the mudroom bench where it had been sitting since Monday, and when I shifted it, the inner zipper pocket caught on the bench edge and fell partially open. I reached in to close it and felt a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a yellow sticky note, the small square kind, and on it in Ryan's neat block handwriting was a 12-character password and the name of an application, ClearWatch Pro. I stood in the mudroom for approximately 4 seconds. Then I took a photograph of the sticky note with my phone, folded it back exactly as it had been, replaced it in the pocket, zipped the pocket closed, and set the gym bag back on the bench in the same position I had found it. That evening, from my personal laptop, the one I used exclusively for consulting work, connected to a separate mobile hotspot I maintained for client confidentiality, and which had never once touched our home network, I downloaded ClearWatch Pro, located the account login using the email address I found in the app's registration settings, and entered the password. The interface loaded in under 10 seconds. 4 live feeds. A camera in the kitchen. A camera in the living room. A camera in the upstairs hallway. A camera in the office. And below the live feeds, an archive. 47 days of recorded footage stored in the cloud, time-stamped and searchable. I did not panic. I did not call anyone. I opened a new document, created a log with column headers, date, time, camera, duration, notes, and I began to work. I approached the archive the way I approach a financial audit, methodically, without emotional investment in the outcome. I was not looking to confirm a feeling. I was looking for facts, and I was going to find every single one of them. Within the first 6 hours of review, spread across 3 evenings with the door of my home office closed, I found what I had ranked as the most probable explanation. Between day 9 and day 31 of the archive, the living room camera documented 11 separate visits from a woman I will describe to you precisely. Her name was Cassandra Webb. She was 31 years old and worked as an associate at a boutique legal consulting firm called Vantana Legal Partners, which had recently entered into a referral arrangement with Kellerman and Walsh. I had met her once, briefly, at a firm event in October. When Ryan introduced her as a colleague we've been working with on a referral project, he said the word colleague with a very specific kind of careful emphasis that I registered at the time and filed without comment. Cassandra visited our home 11 times during the 47 days captured in the archive. Of those 11 visits, 5 occurred between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon on weekdays, when Ryan had told me he was in depositions or client meetings downtown. The living room camera captured them on the sofa together. The hallway camera, positioned outside the master bedroom and the guest room, captured the guest room door closing. I did not need the cameras to show me anything beyond a closed door at noon on a Tuesday during a claimed deposition. In a court of law, and in the court of my own understanding, a closed door is its own testimony. I did not confront Ryan that evening or the next morning or the following week. I closed the laptop, washed my face, and went to bed in the same room where he was already sleeping. And I lay on my side of the mattress and made a decision that I want to describe to you very carefully. I decided not to react, not because I was suppressing something, not because I was in denial, but because I understood, with the clarity that only comes from professional training in risk management, that reacting immediately was the worst possible use of the information I had just acquired. Information has maximum value when it is deployed at the right moment. I was not yet at the right moment. The next morning, I called Margaret Forsyth, my CPA. I asked her to prepare a complete accounting of the consulting income portfolio going back 3 years, including a forward projection based on existing client contracts. Total accumulated earnings in the separate account sat just under $240,000. Margaret had the documentation ready within 2 weeks. I saved it in a folder on my consulting laptop labeled Q4 Planning. 3 days after that, I made a second call to a woman named Patricia Hendricks, a family law attorney practicing out of a firm in Evanston, far enough from our social circle that no mutual connection would encounter my name in the lobby. I had been consulting with Patricia quietly for 4 months by this point, not because I had decided to end the marriage. I want to be honest about that, but because a woman with my financial training and my particular set of observations about the trajectory of her marriage keeps a standing appointment with caution. I had first called Patricia in July, after the dinner party where Ryan laughed about the kitchen knives, after the Sunday morning when he told me women who ask too loudly look aggressive. After the evening he suggested I think about reducing my work hours because availability looks better for partners' wives. I called her in July and I said, "I'm not sure where this is going, but I want to be prepared." She said, "That's the smartest call you'll ever make." She was right. When I called her after finding the camera archive, I said, "I think we're moving into the active phase." She did not ask for clarification. She already had the context. She said, "I'll start drafting." Over the following 6 weeks, I documented the case with the composure of someone trained to process evidence rather than emotion. I created an encrypted folder on my consulting laptop. Into it, I placed timestamp screenshots of all 11 visits from the camera archive, exported using ClearWatch Pro's own built-in export function, which generated accompanying metadata, including GPS confirmation of camera placement at our registered home address. I included Ryan's printed grocery spreadsheet, photographed and scanned. Because the document itself was relevant, it established his pattern of financial monitoring and his characterization of my spending as a problem requiring documentation and correction. I saved a thread of text messages in which he used the phrase, "You're spending money," on 7 separate occasions over 14 months. I saved voice memos I had made in my car immediately after specific incidents, immediately after the dinner party, immediately after the Sunday conversation, immediately after the evening he mentioned my work hours. Then I found the audio. On day 39 of the camera archive, captured by the living room camera on a Tuesday evening while I was working late at Meridian Capital, Ryan was on his phone. He was standing near the fireplace, which placed him approximately 8 feet from the camera. The audio was muffled by distance, but the camera's built-in microphone had captured the conversation in partial fragments. I ran the audio through an enhancement tool 3 times and had it reviewed by an independent audio technician, a professional I hired remotely who produced a written certification of the transcript's accuracy. The fragment that mattered most was this, Ryan said. She won't see it coming. She thinks I installed them to watch the housekeeper. He had installed cameras in our home to build a case against me. He had told himself it was about spending. He told someone else, in our living room, captured on his own equipment, that the real design was surveillance of his wife. And in doing so, he handed me the most important piece of evidence in my own case against him. If you are still watching this story right now, I want you to stop for one moment and hear me. If you have ever been monitored, minimized, or made to feel that your income was a hobby and your contributions were invisible, drop a comment below. Tell me you're here. Tell me what this is bringing up for you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the moment at the settlement conference table is the part I have been building toward this entire time, and I do not want you to miss it. Now let me tell you how it ended, because this story has a public moment. It happened in a conference room in Evanston on a Tuesday morning in January, when the temperature outside was 22 degrees and the sky was the flat, colorless gray of a document that has been photocopied one too many times. Patricia had advised me to attend the settlement conference in person. Ryan's attorney was a man named Conrad Spade from a well-regarded firm on LaSalle Street, polished, experienced, the kind of attorney who believes preparation and authority can substitute for truth. Ryan sat across the table in a navy suit with the look of a man who had spent 3 weeks speaking to lawyers and not sleeping well. I sat across from him in a charcoal blazer with no jewelry except my watch, a vintage Omega I had bought for myself on my 30th birthday, and which has always been, without question, entirely mine. Conrad opened with a proposal that suggested my consulting income should be classified as marital property, because it had grown during the course of the marriage. Patricia responded with the full documentation of its separate account origin, its premarital establishment, its independent tax filing history, and the unambiguous fact that Ryan had never contributed to it, known about it, been named on any related financial instrument, or had any involvement whatsoever in its development. Conrad adjusted his approach and suggested that Ryan's significantly higher partnership income had functionally subsidized my capacity to build the consulting work on the side. Patricia looked at him with the measured patience of a woman who has heard this argument many times and has always won against it, and said, "Mr. Hargrove's firm income in no way subsidizes a separately held portfolio established before the marriage. We would be pleased to demonstrate that comprehensively in discovery." The word discovery arrived in the room and Ryan's posture changed. Discovery meant the camera archive. It meant the ClearWatch Pro export files with their metadata and GPS coordinates. It meant 11 visits logged with machine precision. It meant a Tuesday afternoon phone call captured by his own microphone. Conrad leaned toward his junior partner, and they exchanged a brief, quiet conference. Then Conrad said the thing I had been waiting for. He said, "My client would like to address the allegations regarding the surveillance equipment directly. Mr. Hargrove installed those cameras for household security purposes and was entirely unaware that his wife had obtained the administrator credentials." I opened my portfolio. I removed one single sheet of paper and I slid it across the mahogany table to Conrad Spade. It was a printed transcript of the audio from day 39 of the archive. The phone call. Ryan's voice. His own living room. His own camera. The sentence, printed in clean 12-point font. "She won't see it coming. She thinks I installed them to watch the housekeeper." Below the transcript, I had included the audio export metadata showing the timestamp, the device signature of the ClearWatch Pro system registered to Ryan Hargrove's personal email address, the GPS coordinates confirming the camera's placement within our registered home address, and a signed certification letter from the audio enhancement technician confirming the transcript's verbatim accuracy. Conrad read it, then he read it again. His junior partner read it over his shoulder. Ryan stared at the paper on the table in front of him. Patricia sat with her hands folded in her lap and did not say a word, because she did not need to. In the room, among the six of us, there was a silence that had the particular quality of something irreversible settling into place. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. Conrad said, "I'd like to request a brief recess." Patricia said, "Of course." The junior partner collected the papers. Ryan did not look at me as they stood. But at the door, he stopped. He turned around. In front of Patricia and her associate, with no attorney present to advise him, Ryan Hargrove said, "I didn't think you'd actually do anything. I looked at him the way you look at a weather forecast after the storm has already passed through." "I know," I said, "that was the problem." He walked out. The door closed behind him. Patricia's associate, a young woman of about 26 named Sophia, who had been silent throughout the entire conference, exhaled very quietly. Patricia looked at me. The look contained everything that needed to be said. The settlement was finalized in April. Ryan retained his partnership income and his firm equity. The Lincoln Park house was resolved through a buyout that formally credited my documented contributions to the renovation costs and mortgage payments over 6 years. I walked away with my consulting income portfolio intact, legally classified as separate property with full documentation. I walked away with my retirement accounts, a cash settlement whose terms I am not required to disclose and will not, and every piece of camera footage handled properly through legal channels. Cassandra Webb and her relationship with Ryan became relevant not to me personally, but to Kellerman and Walsh, which maintained a written policy regarding personal relationships between partners and referral firm associates, and which was made aware of the situation through professional channels that I did not initiate and did not need to. On the day I vacated the Lincoln Park house for the last time, I wrote Gloria Reyes a check from my personal account, not the joint account, mine, for 6 months of severance. She cried when I handed it to her. I held her hands and told her she deserved employers who were far better than either of us had been, which made her laugh in the way that Gloria always laughed, with her whole face and no reservation. That laugh was one of the best things about those 3 years, and I am glad it was the last thing I heard in that house. I want to tell you about the aftermath, because the aftermath is not what I expected. I thought I would feel light. I thought the dissolution would feel like setting down something that had been pulling at my arms for years. What I felt instead, in the weeks after everything was finalized, was quieter and more complicated than relief. I felt the full weight of 7 years. Not the betrayal, not the cameras, not the spreadsheet, not Cassandra Webb's 11 visits. The years themselves. The specific accumulation of Sunday mornings when I said, "fine," and meant something entirely different. The dinner parties where I smiled at the right moments. The enormous sustained effort of managing another person's perception of me while simultaneously doing the actual work of my professional life. That energy is not recoverable, and I have spent considerable time sitting with that fact rather than flinching away from it. Ryan called twice in the weeks after the conference. I did not answer either call. He sent one text message that read, "I made a mistake." I know that now. I read it in the parking garage at Meridian, sitting in my car with the engine running, and I thought about what I wanted to say. And then I thought about what Grandma Hargrove, not mine, a woman I had read about in a book once, would have said. And then I thought about what Margaret Forsyth, practical and clear-eyed Margaret, would say. Margaret would say, "That text contains no specific acknowledgement, no actionable proposal, and no legal relevance. Archive it and move on." I archived it and move on. His attorney sent one final letter 6 weeks after the settlement, suggesting that Ryan hoped to discuss the situation further when emotions had settled. Patricia responded with 3 sentences that I did not need to read because I trusted her completely, and which apparently concluded the matter because no further communication arrived. I am living now in a 1-bedroom apartment in the West Loop that I chose entirely alone. I chose the building because of the kitchen window, which catches the morning light from 7 until 9 and makes the whole room feel like something worth waking up in. The Japanese knives are on the magnetic strip above the counter. Margaret Forsyth has been promoted in my life from CPA to something closer to a trusted strategist, which happens naturally when a person has known your real financial picture for years before your spouse did. Patricia Hendricks sends a card every April, which I suspect is her version of a professional tradition. The consulting practice has grown significantly in the 14 months since I dissolved the marriage, because I no longer spend my Friday evenings being a partner's wife at firm events I was not invited to enjoy. I took on 3 new clients in the first quarter after I moved into the West Loop apartment. I am now projecting close to $90,000 in consulting income this year, in addition to my Meridian salary. I present to the board next month. I have been recommended for a managing director position, which I intend to accept. I think about Ryan sometimes, and I want to be honest about what that thinking feels like. Because I know the people who watch stories like this one sometimes expect something cleaner. I do not think about him with anger. I do not think about him with grief. At least not often. I think about him the way you think about a system that was not designed for you, not maliciously, just accurately. He needed a wife who would accept being monitored and occasionally narrated at dinner parties as the cost of a comfortable life. That was not a role I was ever actually suited for. I stayed in it far longer than I should have because I confused Grandma May's instruction. That wasn't my grandmother. That was another story, another woman. I confused loyalty with endurance. I stayed because leaving felt like losing something, and it took a sticky note with a password to help me understand that I had already built everything I would need on the other side. There is a mentor I had early in my career at Meridian, a woman named Sylvia Cheng who ran the strategy division and who had the best instincts for structural risk I have ever encountered in a professional setting. Sylvia used to say, during the most pressured quarterly reviews, the most dangerous person in any negotiation is the one who has already decided what she is willing to lose. I have thought about that sentence many times in the past 14 months. I had already decided. Not the night I found the cameras. Not the day I found the password. Earlier than that, I had decided the morning I first opened the separate bank account. I had decided the first time I dialed Patricia Hendricks. I had decided every quiet Friday evening I spent building the consulting practice while Ryan attended firm events alone and assumed I was reading. Ryan installed those cameras because he needed to believe he was in control of the story. He handed me the admin password because he was careless in the specific way that people are careless when they have never genuinely considered that the person they are trying to surveil might be more capable than they assumed. He sat across a kitchen table from a chartered financial analyst, a vice president, a woman who had been quietly managing a 6-figure side practice for 3 years, and handed her a color-coded spreadsheet about grocery receipts, and he called it a conversation about spending habits. And I looked at that spreadsheet and I said, okay. And I went upstairs and I sent 3 attachments to my attorney. What he thought he was surveilling was a wife. What he was actually watching, without knowing it, was a woman who had already begun to leave, who had been building the exit quietly, in the margins of a marriage that had made itself too small for her, for longer than he would ever have the complete picture to understand. If you are somewhere right now that is making you smaller than you are, if someone in your life monitors what you spend and narrates your choices to rooms full of people and calls your income a supplement and tells you that asking for more makes you look aggressive, I am not here to tell you what to do. I am not your advisor. But I will tell you what I did. I kept a separate account from the beginning. I found a good attorney before I needed one, urgently. I documented everything systematically and without emotion. I waited until I was ready, not until I was pushed. The difference between those 2 departure points is the difference between desperation and strategy. And strategy, in my experience, produces better outcomes every single time. I want to ask you one thing before I close this story. And I mean this as a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. Have you ever stayed somewhere past the moment you knew you should leave? Not out of love, but out of the belief that leaving meant losing something you had built? Drop your answer in the comments below. Tell me what you stayed for and whether you'd make the same choice again. I read every single comment on this channel, and I mean that. I also want to say something to the women watching this who are in the early stages of something that hasn't reached its worst moment yet. The ones who are still at the dinner party smiling at the right moments. The ones who know what that pause feels like before you say fine when you mean something completely different. You are not imagining it. You are not high-strung. You are not overreacting to things that are small. The things that look small from the outside are almost never small on the inside, and the people who tell you they are small are usually the ones who benefit most from your believing them. Keep the separate account. Find the right attorney. Document what matters. And build something quietly, in the time you have before you need it. Thank you for watching this one all the way through. Genuinely. This story required something from me to tell, and I want you to know that I am aware of that, and I am aware that you stayed. Revenge Diary exists because three of us believe that the quietest women in the room are almost always the most prepared, and that those women deserve to have their stories told with the same precision and composure they brought to living them. Every day we put up a new story, written and narrated for the women who have been the overlooked one, the invisible one, the one who was handed a spreadsheet about her grocery receipts by a man who had never once questioned his own. You are the reason we are here. You are the reason we come back. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because we will be here tomorrow and the day after that, and every single story is built for someone who needed to hear it. I will see you in the next one.